Welcome, everyone. Virtual Door Knocking 2020, where we are serving up information where you can get to know candidates, you can get to know what's going on in our current election campaign process. We are right on the precipice of voting for our officials, our government, from state to local to all the way up to our presidential election. I am so happy to have on the show this morning Dylan Moore. He is from Freedom, Washington. And we're going to talk about election integrity today. But before we jump into election integrity, what I would like for you to do is tell me a little bit about Freedom, Washington, and how that all began and what was the start, the kind of inception there.
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk about this. So Freedom, Washington was spontaneously formed not that long ago when I ran into a man by the name of James Miller, who was a former, he is a former Boeing project manager and engineer who set up safety systems to detect failures in airplanes. So his job was literally to make sure that these airplanes aren't going to fall out of the sky. And he had written what is called a writ of mandamus to the Secretary of State. And a writ of mandamus, and he had to explain it to me because I hadn't heard of it either.
Neither have I.
Is a court is a way to get a court order to get a public official to do their job. So if you go to a public official and per law their job is to provide you with whatever, and they're not doing it, you can go to the court and get a court order to say, look, you have to do this. So what James Miller did was he said, okay, I'm really keyed into looking failures at systems, so I want to look at our election process. So in our election process, we have these mail-in ballots. We fill out the ballots, we send them in, and then they get fed through a machine. Once they're fed through a machine, they go onto a USB drive, and from that USB drive, they go over to a computer. And he says, I would like to see what's going on in all of these steps. You know, show me what's on the USB drive, and I want to see the code on the computer. I'm not necessarily accusing that anything is going wrong. However, it's an election. It needs to be free and open. I want to see what's going on. This is why this is an election integrity issue. And so he did this writ of mandamus to say, okay, I need to be able to look over this code to make sure everything is okay. Mm-hmm. And he was stymied at every corner and every angle. And I discovered this guy because he started writing posts on Facebook, and these posts, people take screenshots and they pass them around, and then they go as viral as they can now with Facebook throttling everything.
Right.
And I said, I got to get a hold of this guy. And I was able to get a hold of him, and in the course of talking with him, because the first thing I said is we need to record a video and slap it on the internet, even if nobody knows who I am. It just needs to be publicly available so people can hear this story. I realized that he had a plan to address how to check this system to make sure that there's no funny business going on. And I don't mean change the law so we all have voter ID. I mean, that would be great, but that's something that's...
So that's a process.
That's a process that's going to take a while.
Right.
His plan was that here's an idea where we can check and make sure that no funny business is going on, even if we're not allowed to see the code and the processes inside the election or the vote tabulation machines. Mm-hmm. So I was immediately like, well, let's do it. Yeah. Like right now, the election's coming.
The clock has already started. It's ticking. Let me ask you this, if I may, as we transition into talking about election integrity. This is about transparency.
Yes.
From A to Z, so you get your vote, you fill it out, you send it in, it goes through a machine. This machine downloads it to a USB, and then it gets over to a computer where they start to tabulate everything. What you're saying here is like, okay, not that we're going to dumb down the process, but we want to check the process
Correct.
To make sure that there's transparency.
Correct.
And if it's anything incorrect, we can correct it so we can have safe, secure election process open. Yeah, exactly. And everybody's aware of hey, no, it's above board.
Yes, absolutely correct. And so the Miller plan is what we came up with. And then we have a couple other group of, there's more volunteers other than me and Jim that we put this together. And we said, okay, the Miller plan, which you could see at freedomwashington.org and download it. It's a 2-page PDF, which says, hey, Secretary of State, hey, county auditors, because your county auditors are responsible for tabulating the votes in the counties. We want the Miller Plan, and this is something as the citizens of Washington State, which according to the Washington State Constitution, we have the right to free and open elections, and no force, neither civil or military, shall get in the way. We are the citizens saying, look, we understand it's your job, and this is the way that things are set up. This is the law. The law allows this. Fine, but we want to have an audit process so we can make sure that our elections are free and open.
Yeah, and they're fair.
And
yeah.
I don't think that's a very big ask.
No, I don't
Yeah.
think so either. I mean, and to your point, I think nowadays, I mean, with especially with the political and the climate of the day right now, everything is being scrutinized to a certain degree. And when I say that, I use that with a very short rope, if you will, because depending on what side of the aisle you're on, they're going to kind of force their agenda. So what you're saying is like, okay, regardless, and maybe I'm putting little words in your mouth, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying, regardless of your political preference, there should be a open and transparent
Correct.
way we should look at all of these.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great.
I mean, this isn't a Republican or Democrat or independent or any of that. It's if we can't have free and open elections, and let's, for the sake of the conversation, let's assume the worst case scenario that these things are being manipulated. At that point, it doesn't matter which political party is doing it.
Right, because our system is
because now it's a tyranny. It's not a republic anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
Our system has been compromised.
Right.
And because we are not taking the correct protocols and allowing someone to go in there and go, hey, I'm going to look at this from an independent point of view, regardless of your political preference. We want to look at it from the standpoint of our democracy of, hey, look, you know what? I put this in. Is it being tabulated correctly? And is my vote really counting at that point?
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
Okay, that's good information. So let me ask you this: in reference to election integrity, from that point of view, what you just described, are there other things that general public or Joe public should be watching for or should watch out for when they go to the polls or anything of that
We
nature?
don't go to the polls here in Washington State anymore.
Exactly.
Which is another conversation that we can have.
Right.
But I think one of the big ones, and I've been learning this stuff at light speed since I've been interacting with James and the rest of the people in our group. If you didn't know, you can become an election observer in every county, and I mean, you personally can't be an election observer in every county, but every county, in the area that you're allowed to vote in,
Sure.
You're allowed to be an election observer. And if you go to your county auditor's website, excuse me, they will have directions for how you can do that. And the point of an election observer is, so for the people counting the votes, and I mean, we're going to see how this is kind of a little bit silly, but for the people counting the votes, you're behind plate glass. This is, and I haven't done this yet. This is what I've heard from people who've done it. You're behind plate glass, and you get to watch the people counting the votes. And the idea is that, okay, public, here's your ability to watch what's going on. Now, the fact that it's behind plate glass, and maybe there's one camera that doesn't necessarily get all the angles, is kind of like, well, are we watching or are we performing?
Yeah.
Right. However, from what I've heard is that getting people to be an election observer is like unheard of. I mean, it's not, excuse me, unheard of is too strong. It's barely anybody participates.
Very rare.
And so, and again, I didn't even know there was a thing. And I mean, I think this is a testament to our educational system, which again is another conversation entirely. But I'm just learning all these tools that are available to the public. We can complain and say, hey, we're living in this system that's getting more and more tyrannical and we don't know what to do about it. And it's like, well, let's start looking at the rules that are available to us right now. This
Right.
writ of mandamus. I'm like, that's a thing? I could do that? And then here's, you can go be an election observer. So, and I haven't actually answered your question yet.
No, you're fine. You're good.
Another thing, and I want to point out that this is important. I don't want to make it sound like that this is the only issue in election integrity. Is there's many other issues at hand, and I'm speaking particularly to Washington State. I don't know if you knew that in Washington State that you can register to vote with a utility bill or a bank statement.
Wow, I thought it was your driver's license and a form of your residency, but I didn't realize it was just your utility
You
bill.
ready for that? So it's not that direct. Listen to this. I couldn't believe this, and I figured this out from reading the law. This is going to the state website, looking at RCW.
Okay.
Right. Where, okay, there's this registration form, asks for a driver's license and a social security number. Either or have to match, not both. And your social security number, only the last 4 digits have to match, not the whole thing. So you send, oh yeah, right? It gets better. Just wait. So you send that thing in, and let's say you couldn't manage either. Driver's license doesn't match, and the social security doesn't. The last 4 digits don't match. It is not rejected. You become provisionally registered. Once you're provisionally registered, you'll be mailed an identification notice, and the identification notice will request and say, "Hey, we need to see. Please send us a valid driver's license, a valid social security number, or what are these alternate forms of ID?" And of those alternate forms of ID, utility bill and bank statement are acceptable forms to get your registration to vote.
Wow, that's didn't know didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's to me that's pretty sloppy.
Well,
to say the least.
Sloppy would be like if it's overlooked. This is specifically written into state law.
Yeah,
I mean,
that needs to be
jaw through the floor moment
Yeah.
when I was reading that. Yeah.
So, given that scenario, I mean, and granted, I don't know who were the lawmakers that put that into the RCW. That doesn't make any sense to me. But given that premise, and you may know this answer, you may not. Maybe something we need to all research. But with that being said, with that process in place for someone to be registered as a voter, how much do you believe in your mind, or how many people, based on percentage, you believe that is happening in Washington State that could potentially skew the vote one way or another?
So let's start with what it takes to skew the vote one way or another. As most people are familiar with, in 2004, Dino Rossi lost the gubernatorial race by 150 votes, approximately, after they had 3 recounts and kept discovering ballots. So, I mean, to even talk about that in percentages, what's that, like 0.0001% of the vote? So it doesn't take much. And now these are numbers that I've heard, and I haven't done the full research in, but Judicial Watch has a chart of counting how many more registered voters are in a state more than adult citizens. According to Judicial Watch, there are 168,000 more registered voters in Washington State than there are adult citizens.
How in the world?
So if that's true, and I don't know how Judicial Watch came up with that number, but if that's true, that means that's the theoretical minimum of fake voters, because not everybody who's an adult citizen is registered to vote.
Correct.
So if we're looking, again, going back to the Dino Rossi situation where 150 votes decided the difference, it's like, well, what would the election really been if, forget what I just said about maybe or maybe not the tallying machines are doing anything. What if that was addressed?
Right.
How different would the landscape in Washington State look? And, there's, I don't want to get too into depth of the, what goes on now that we're mailing all our ballots. Mm-hmm. Can a postal worker mess with it? Can the ballots be intercepted? All that sort
Right.
of stuff. So I think there's multiple layers, and let's say there's 8 layers, and I think there's 8 layers. Mm-hmm. And let's say each one is 0.5%. Well, if there's 4% by the time that you're done,
yeah, that's huge.
That's more than enough to swing the 0.00001%.
Right. Exactly. And granted, I look at all what you're saying from a very responsible perspective. I mean, granted, I'm a registered voter. I've voted for years, and this conversation that we're having, I've never got this immersed into this topic with election integrity, and then you're even breaking it down from the front end, how people actually get registered.
Yeah, we hit the front end and the back end, which is how they're finally counted, right?
Exactly. And I think all of this you have to look at this from a very responsible perspective, because I know there's a lot of conspiracy theory, out there, and they talk about this and that. But what we're talking about is, hey, look, the front end, which is the law, and how they've got that written into the law, and how that could potentially swing the outcome, and then the process itself
Right.
could possibly swing in the outcome because they're not tabulated correctly or they're misrepresented it, whatever that is. But having it from the front end all the way to the back end, having that transparency, and then having the laws written so that, hey, these people are allowed to vote based on the proper mechanism or identification, et cetera, and not this loosey-goosey kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then particularly, the thing with the utility bill is very telling to me, because if the utility bill is acceptable, why do you have to, fill in the form and wait till you get a response back before that's the option? Why not just
exactly
have it right there at the beginning? And I think the answer is, people are going to look at the form and they say driver's license and social security number, and they okay, that's legit, right? Well, if it said bank statement or utility bill, they'd look at it right there, and then you would know already.
Right, exactly.
I had to go digging through the, RCW, and I mean, anybody knows digging through law is just like, oh my God. All right.
Bring out the bullet, right?
But what I lost my train of thought. Keep talking.
No, you're fine. This is just, like I said, a conversation that we're having, and just a little bit of a recap before we continue on. We're on the show Virtual Door Knocking 2020, and I think this is important, and I'm just going to give a shout out quickly to BD Local for even having this, because I think it resonates with people out there that want to be informed, and they want to be informed the correct way. They want to learn, they want to understand, they want to know the processes in place so they don't get caught up in Charlotte's Web, if you will. They want their voice to be heard, and they want their vote to be counted. And what we're talking about is being counted the correct way, so there's transparency from the front end to the back end. So, hey, look, if there's something going on with the campaign, with the votes or whatever, what is that word that you said? It was the law that you learned from James?
Writ of mandamus.
Writ of mandamus. We have the ability,
the right
to go to the court and request transparency so we can see what's going on. Because like I said earlier, this is such an important election. Like I said, I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, progressive, whatever you are, Tea Party, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Your vote needs to be counted, and we want to make sure that there's integrity all the way through the process. And that's what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Here today.
And I remembered what I wanted to say before I lost my train of thought. And before I say it, writ of mandamus at freedomwashington.org, you can read James' original writ of mandamus that he sent to the Secretary of State if you're interested.
Awesome.
The key phrase or the key term that we want to know here is chain of custody. So, and again, this is all James teaching me because I wasn't that aware of it. Is a chain of custody is basically saying things are watched and secured from point A to point B. So in a courtroom setting, for the rules of evidence, chain of custody says if you have a piece of evidence that there's a knife with blood on it or whatever, right? And we want to get the fingerprints and the blood sample. That evidence has to be secured through the entire trial. And if at any point there is a lack of that security, the evidence has to be thrown out. Not because it was tampered with, but because the possibility that it was tampered with was there. So if we apply that same level of rigor to our own election system, we say, okay, what is the chain of custody? And I mean, even starting from the beginning, like who's checking to make sure that I'm a citizen? Okay, I got the ballot. I sent it in the mail. Who's checking to make sure that got from point A to point B? Who's checking to make sure that, or what's securing someone from intercepting it and losing it or steaming it open and adjusting it? Once it's counted, where's the chain of custody to say, okay, with all the electronic apparatuses going on in here, what's the security and the openness so we can watch what's happening there?
Right.
And so if this were in a court, all the votes would have to get thrown out because the chain of custody was broken.
Right.
So the big thing is we need to have a chain of custody. And the point of the Miller Plan, and again, I want to get that into the Miller Plan, get that into people's heads, because that's what we're asking, or I mean, I'm being nice. That's what we're demanding that our public officials do, is they're not, and then not to fix the whole thing. we're focusing on the end right here because
Right.
I think of all the things that can be fixed, this is actually the easiest one, right? I mean, if we're going to say, okay, there's all these fake voters on the voter rolls, well, what do we do about it? I don't know. I got an idea, but it's hard, right? For the election machines, it's like, okay, well, here's a plan. Here's the Miller plan that says, at least for this aspect of what we're doing, we can have some sort of chain of custody to make sure that these election tabulation machines are counting things correctly.
Yeah, I think that's important because what you said, that the chain of custody, and
Yes.
what you're indicating here is that, hey, look, you know what, that we know that there's some stuff on the front end that could be, looked at a little differently,
Right. And in the middle, but
and in the middle, and right now we're right at the end, right?
Yeah.
However, because we are, what is it, 4.5, 5 weeks or so before the actual official, count
Election,
start
yes.
the election. What you're saying for this particular aspect and this timing, the chain of command, or the chain of custody, is applicable to right now.
It is applicable to right now, and in order for it to work, we have to let the officials know that we want it. And this is why I wanted to come on, because for me and James to sit to have Zoom calls but with each other to talk about this, it's not going to go anywhere, right? And then for us to contact, because we have contact the public officials saying, look, this is a Miller plan, we want you to put it into place. I actually spoke with one of the county auditors who, because I emailed all of them the plan to say, okay, you have officially received it. And he was very nice to me, and he made some very good points, which is, I get a stack of emails like this. If you're listening to this, not watching, I'm holding my I'm holding my hand up to show a stack, right? And I've got to determine what's good in here and what's not. And so, I'm sure these guys get crazy people emailing them stuff all the time, making all sorts of weird demands. So how does he differentiate me
from the rest
from some other crazy guy, right? Well, I think the way that's done is, first of all, having the conversation with him, I think, really helped, because then he could see that I wasn't crazy when he spoke to me over the phone. But if more and more people are saying, look, we want this too. We want this too. So to email, call, and if we can, the COVID thing has made everything crazy, interact with these people in person to say, look, this is really important. I want you to do this. And if you're not willing to do it, can you please explain to me what your issue with election integrity is? Now, I know... So we're really close on time in terms of when the election is coming, because what this is going to require is actually a large amount of people manually counting ballots. And the argument against it is going to be, well, where's the workforce to do that? And I would argue, and particularly if you're even listening to this, I presume you're still interested, otherwise you would have turned it off by now, is if people knew that this is an option, I don't think finding people to count votes would be hard at all. Because I think, particularly in this state, there's a level of confusion and frustration of that, something seems to be up with the way that the elections keep happening. And again, even going back to 2004, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but it's just like the perfect example, right? So Dino Rossi wins by like 350 votes. And we need a recount. They found another 100. Oh, we need another recount. Oh, we found another 150. Oh, we need another recount. Oh, we win. Okay, no more recounts. Even that, it's like, okay, that's a little weird. And it was brought up to me. I haven't looked into this, but I believe it's true, and it should be easy to look up. Dino Rossi was in court for 2 years after that, and won his court case and showed that of these votes that were found, not enough of them were real votes after they went through each one to actually flip the lever. So that creates an interesting question. So if we 2 years later find out that he had actually won, what's supposed to happen?
Right.
Is Christine Gregoire, who was the woman who won, is she supposed to immediately get up and say, oh, I'm sorry, I lost, and then he immediately gets his 4 years and everything that she did become null and void? Well, clearly that didn't happen. So it's... what that means is, if cheating does occur, even if it's caught later, it doesn't matter.
See, and I have a problem with that. I mean, and
I have a problem with that.
and hence that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, because it and like I said earlier, it speaks to our democracy. If you're gonna get something by ill-gotten gains, cheating, or you stoop somebody out of something or whatever, that speaks to our democracy. And I'm big on fairness. I'm big on justice. I'm big on equality. I'm big on all of that. And when we have systems in place that don't have the appropriate checks and balances, and you just ramrod something through and go, "Oh, that's just the way it is.
Hey, we won! Yeah, look at that! Yeah.
That doesn't work in my book." And then when we find that something was wasn't supposed to happen, and someone gets into an elected seat, and we found out that, hey, the tabulation was off, and these votes that were counted, they should have been thrown out because they weren't properly,
and it was proven
vetted.
in court. Yeah,
Proven in court.
Yeah,
and then we come back and we just kind of brush it under the table, under the carpet. What are we saying for the future elections?
Well, I think he just already answered it.
Exactly. And so we're like I said, we're right on the precipice of going in, casting our ballots, going in, voting, or what have you. And I think this conversation, and this is the problem that we have, and this is just my own opinion. The problem that we have is that a lot of times these things pop up right at the end or during the middle of a campaign, where really the conversation should start right after a campaign and then change the process leading up to the next campaign.
Which is what we're planning on.
Right.
And then, I mean, I would like to start addressing the different potentialities of voter fraud, but what we saw is we said, okay, that takes more time than we've got right now. So this is something that theoretically, all it takes is the I'm going to use the word capitulate.
Right, I love that word.
The auditors and the Secretary of State to capitulate and say, look, okay, yeah, go ahead and do it.
Yeah. We need somebody to acquiesce over to us.
And then we need the workforce. And then let me put this in perspective. There are, I believe I'm remembering this number correctly, 7,435 precincts in the state of Washington, meaning there's 7,435 individual places counting votes.
Sure.
So if we were to do a full manual count, that means we need, how many people do you need in each one of those? 2, 4, 8? So multiply 435 times
28,000.
Yeah, right. And so they can say, okay, this is a manpower problem. Well, again, I agree. However, I don't think if this was put out in a way to say, look, we need the manpower in order to maintain election integrity, I don't think you would find any shortage of volunteers.
No, I would have to agree with you on that, because I think there's enough people out there to say, hey, look, this is a problem. We want to make sure, at least for this segment of time, we address it on this level, and we just don't throw up our hands and turn a blind eye and then walk away from it. And,
right.
And then we're faced with a potential snare in our election or elected officials when it's all said and done.
Right. And it's within the law to do this. So the Secretary of State, let me back up a little bit. I never had a Washington State history class. I never had a Washington State Constitution class. Nothing. Civics, nothing.
Join in.
I had a U.S. history class. I never had U.S. civics, but I had a U.S. history class. I had Washington, nothing. And so when I decided I wanted to get involved in this and interested in it, I'm like, okay, I got to go back to the basics. I didn't know that we have multiple executive elected positions here. So in Washington State, I don't know if there's other states that do this, but I think Washington's unique in the fact that for example, the Secretary of State is elected. The superintendent of the public educational system is elected. And the treasurer is elected. And normally, the governor just appoints these people. And same with the president. For the equivalent federal offices, they just appoint them. And the framers of Washington State really wanted to divide that power up. So the Secretary of State can wave her nose at the governor. Same can, the insurance commissioner can wave his nose at the Secretary of State, because they have independent executive power. However, they are beholden to the legislature, because that's supposed to be the
right
power within a republic. And within the law as it's given, the Secretary of State is using an interpretation of that law to say, okay, the tabulation machines are allowed, which, if you read the law, you say, okay, I guess you could interpret it that way. So, however, what that means is you could interpret it the other way to say, oh, yeah, well, so let's just count them all manually.
Right.
It doesn't require a change in law, is what I'm saying. And then specifically to the Miller Plan, I want to be clear. The Miller Plan doesn't say, okay, we need to manually count all of the precincts. We would like that. We'll take it if that's an option. But to meet in the middle, the plan is 25% of the precincts, 1 in 4, within each county. So 20,
Right.
not like have them all end up in King County or something, right? In each county, 25% of the precincts, randomly selected, get a manual count. And that should be enough where if something were to fudge, it would get caught.
Yes.
Yes.
No. Yeah, I totally subscribe to that. Well, I tell you, we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered the
A lot of ground. It was a lot.
election integrity. We talked about the group coming together, the Freedom Washington. We talked
About utility bills.
and
how powerful a document your utility bill is.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you know what? I mean, all of these different things, and I really think as we finish up here today, Dylan, what could people do during this? These final 4 to 6 weeks. I think we're down in that range. I think it's like 4.5, maybe 5 weeks before we go to the polls. What could people do in the state of Washington to help us avoid this trap of election integrity? I know you mentioned Observer. Yeah, I know you mentioned, go to the freedomwashington.org.
Yeah, I think those are the two big ones. So to keep it simple, I think becoming an election observer is important, not because, like I said, you get stuck behind plate glass and you don't necessarily do anything. However, if nobody's even showing up to that, so just getting the awareness of going and seeing what's going on, I think is important, and to show the people who are the bureaucrats who are putting this together, it's like, there are more eyes on what's going on here. And then the second thing is the Miller Plan. Again, it's 2 pages long. Give it a read. It's at freedomwashington.org, and let specifically your auditors and the Secretary of State know that you want the Miller Plan, because that's what's going to take that from that pile of crazy or a potential crazy of, here's this inbox of stuff that I got to deal with, to like, okay, there's a lot of people talking about this. I should probably focus on it. And if there's enough heat on these people, because I think these public officials, are able to operate in secrecy, not because they're doing anything secret, it's because nobody's looking at them.
Right, exactly. And that's what we talked about at the top of the show, the transparency part of it. It's like, hey, look, you know what? There are people looking at what you're doing. And I think that's the whole thing with our democracy and our republic. If there's no checks and balances, then these people feel like they have all this power and they can
one's checking them.
Yeah, they just go and do what they want to do. But we, the people that put them in the office, we should be holding them accountable to the processes that are on the books, to the processes, through the tabulations and the whole 9 yards, and say, hey, wait a minute, pump the brakes. Let's look at this from the right perspective, because we have somebody looking over your shoulder. And I think that's important as we move deeper into this election period. And let's do our part. If you're retired, or if you've got extra time on your hand on that day,
make the time.
This is the most important election that we face in probably years to come. I know everybody says that, and every time we have an election, but let your voice be heard. But not only that, let's show up. Let's go out there. Let's observe. Let's keep these people accountable so we can get the right people in office. Vote your conscience, of course, but let's make sure that we're doing the right things to make sure that the integrity of the vote is there. Any parting words as we close up today, Dylan, regarding this subject? This was a great topic to talk about during this particular campaign and this time.
No, I think that'll do it. Other than, thanks again for having me on and giving me the opportunity to have this conversation.
No, thank you for coming on. He drove all the way down from Everett. It was a long drive, but you know what? He made it here this morning, and I'm so glad that he took the time out of his day to come on down here to talk about this very important subject as we head into the election process. So once again, this is Virtual Door Knocking 2020. 2020. Thank you, BD Local, and also all of the other sponsors that have sponsored this show this morning, and appreciate your time again. Make sure you go on to freedomwashington.org, read the Miller Plan, get yourself involved, check it out. Get enlightened, get involved. Let's keep everything transparent as we move forward. All right? Take care. We'll see you on the next show.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.